Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our podcast. This is our podcast on healing from abuse. I wanted to talk about the fact that we will actually have repeat abuse choices, and I don't want you to feel bad about that. If you've been abused, you'll often end up in another abusive kind of relationship, and another one, and maybe even another one. I just think you need to be aware of that and not be hard on yourself. It's like we're working through the different sorts of abuse and facing it. And if we do this, we'll often feel like we're a failure or a loser because we did it. If you've had a childhood abuse, then maybe there were certain types of abuse in that. Maybe it was physical and verbal, maybe it was sexual. You might land up in your adulthood with your partner being abusive, but they might not have the same pattern. It will be abusive, but they could be a subtle form. It could be mental abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and maybe a bit of verbal. Therefore, you don't recognise it straight away because it's not like you're being hit every day. I want you to look at this and realise that it's just another form. It's always because they're coming from power and control, of course. They're not coming from love. And abuses never come from love. They fake it, but they don't really come from love. And if they have any love for you, it's usually conditional. However, this pattern will keep occurring until you work through your stuff. And then after a while, you just will recognise people straight away and not go there. I landed up having an abusive childhood. Then I landed up with a couple of emotionally, I would say, mentally abusive boyfriends. Then I landed up with an emotionally, psychologically, mentally, and a little bit verbally abusive husband. And then during that, you're going to so relate to this. And during that time, I landed up with some kind of abusive friends along the way. They were a little bit more subtle. Maybe they were a little bit verbally abusive. Maybe they were because they were mean-spirited and said horrible things. Maybe they were emotionally abusive or weren't there for you, whereas you were always there for them. Maybe they were mentally abusive and psychologically. So I kind of generated it through my life and kept attracting it. And they always had power and control issues, always control freaks. Sometimes they were really subtle, sweet control freaks, and it was hard to see, and other times they were full-on control freaks. It's okay. It's part of your learning. It's part of your healing. But from now on, I want you to understand that you can easily attract these people. And I want you to put them through a little bit of a test and see how controlling and how much from power they come, and then how much from love they come. Because that's the thing, isn't it? And controllers can act loving, don't get me wrong, but you'll get the feeling around it. It'll always be that they get their own way and how they want to do it. And they'll just dish you off if you made arrangements for them, come and have coffee with you or go out for dinner, and they get a better offer. You just get pushed aside, and that's emotional abuse. They don't make you feel special, really. There'll be a fair bit of damage control if you stand up to them, and often an end to those relationships if you say you're not happy with the way they're treating you and you need it to stop. They'll just have a hissy fit, and then that will probably be the end of it, which is fine because we don't need a life with abusers in it anymore. This pattern can actually make you feel annoyed. I was frustrated and annoyed with myself that I realised that I'd done it with my dad. Then I married a form of my dad. And when I realised it was fairly late into the marriage, I was even more crabby with myself because it was like, oh, why didn't I work this out 20 years ago? But I didn't. I didn't see it because it was like a different form. However, once I saw it, it changed the whole ball game because then I realised this was abuse and I wasn't going to put up with it anymore, and that became the demise of the relationship, shall we say, because the abuser didn't like it. Abusers never like it when you stand up to them, but you need to make boundaries with them and not tolerate bad behaviour. It was really funny because my dad's saying, which is really hilarious considering what he was like, he said, people treat you the way you let them treat you. And of course, because he got away with so much with children and with my mum, he thought that we let him do it. It's like he didn't even take responsibility in that way. But I still think the saying's interesting. So if we let people be abusive to us, rude to us, mean, and ignore us and punish us and go running back to them, we let them do that, don't we? Whereas if we stand back, if they be like that, and then decide whether it's a healthy relationship for us. Any abusive relationship is not healthy for you. It never is. You might not have a choice if your mum and dad are abusive or some of your siblings. It's very hard to choose what to do. However, you can make boundaries and leave, go home, tell them you don't like how they're speaking to you, or talk to you another day and hang up. You can still not let them extend that treatment. It's about not letting them get away with treating you like crap anymore. You're not doing that anymore. And that makes you a survivor of it. If you've come out of these abusive situations, you're almost ready for them. You feel comfortable in a weird way with that dynamic because particularly if you had childhood abuse, because you grew up with it. So that's all you knew. You just thought that was kind of, in a weird way, normal. Therefore, it's very easy to go into a relationship and not see it. I remember I was going out for lunch with one of my girlfriends and she turned up and she didn't know my husband very well. And she came in and he was in one of his moods and we left and she's alone. And she got in the car and she went, "Is he always like that?" And I went, "Oh, what do you mean?" She said, "Like that, like he was." And I was so close in it, I just sort of got used to him being like that. It was like my norm. And it made me look at it and go like, he shouldn't have been like that. He was just acting out because he didn't like that I was going out. Because abusers are very territorial. They will want you to just be there for them, looking after them. It'll be about them. And if there's any other people that you give attention to, and that includes your children, by the way, you can have trouble with people who are abusive. I think if you've got this far, and if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably on your way to recovery. Don't look back with regret. They were your lessons and you learned a lot from them. You don't particularly want to do them anymore. Now be careful who you let into your inner circle. Of course, we're going to have to deal with people who are like this at work or in some of our family groups and even some of the friends where we have history, but we can manage it better now. And we also know what they're like and we know what they're doing. Abusers are also kind of negative people. I found them quite negative. They've got a fake front, but they're actually full of negativity because they're just mean usually and cruel. They have a cruelty about them. And that's the other way you can recognise people in social situations, especially if you're meeting new people. They will say cutting things, make out like it's a joke, or really disparaging things to another person, like put downs. They do a lot of put downs socially, and sort of that's how they vent it. And everyone makes out like it's a joke, but anyone who's doing that is going to have some emotional abuse, mental, psychological abusive habits. Kind of keep away from those kind of people. They don't have to be humiliating people in public, making people feel less. That's a really big sign for you. They don't hit people with a stick. They just hit them with their words and make them feel really uncomfortable, and really it's a nasty thing to do. It's a good sign for you though, anyone who's like that. Be kind to yourself this week. Start to realise that it wasn't your fault. In a way, I think abuse kind of blinds you to what's normal and what's not normal. And part of the healing is you start to realise what's normal and what's not normal, and then you can do something about that. So take care of yourself. Keep working on yourself. Keep doing your release work, and look around in the next while and listen to people, and you'll see who's the more subtle abusers. The emotional, mental and psychological are the more subtle forms. I think they're really hard to pick. And there's like a verbal abuse one where they're smiling and being verbally abusive to people. Have a look at that one as well. And make sure you don't do it because, of course, we've had the greatest teachers in the world of how to be abusive. So you don't want to repeat the pattern in your life and become a little abuser, because it's very easy because you're so skilled because you're at the receiving end, so you know how to flip back. Look at that too, that you don't repeat. And if you are abusive, you are now going to stop it. And if you're with someone who can tell you when you're being abusive, that's really handy. When I was teaching, I remember saying to my partner, if ever I sound like a teacher when I'm talking to you, you tell me, because we can carry it over from our workplace into our personal life. And I didn't want to sound or act like a teacher when I was actually out in my social world. And you can do the same. You can say to people around you, if ever you see I'm being abusive, I want you to pull me up on it so I can stop doing it, because that's also a good way to stop the repeat of the abuse and also the generational continuance of abuse, because abuse can be quite generational. Sending you healing and lots of love and lots of light.